Alright, hello everybody, and welcome back to the balance changes. Let's just continue from where we left off, I suppose. The Adventurous. The problem with this card is that just 3 random pirates as like a draw engine is just not that useful. Often, people will have optimized decks, right? They either want to deal lots of damage or win in the final fight or whatever it is that they want to do. 3 random pirates just usually isn't going to help you achieve that. That's not to say that, random pirates are completely useless, because I think pirates, especially random ones, compared to other stuff that you can get randomly, pirates I think are more useful than other creatures. So, there is some value in having pirates added to your hand randomly, but certainly not when it costs 4 gold. That's a huge amount, especially when you compare it to something like Krasium, which is going to draw 2 actual cards you deliberately put into your deck, and it gives you a gold. The power level difference between those 2 cards is absolutely enormous. Nobody wants 3 random pirates. So, I made it cheaper, and I also made it give you more pirates. The idea here is that, if you're getting random cards, you need a big selection of them, so that you're more likely to get stuff that's actually useful. We also made it cheaper because, I know Meg exists, but it's just too expensive. In fact, this is kind of what we've done for most of the add random cards. We've just reduced their cost a bit and improved their efficiency. Because I imagine it would be really fun to play with a card that draws, random pirates, or just random cards generally. I think drawing random cards is really exciting. And currently this card isn't. It just needs to be made into the realms of playability. Even this one doesn't compare that favorably to Burnt Meat, but I can still see this being, a lot better in a drafting format or a sealed format where you get 60 random cards and you have to build a deck of 30, or even just straight up having a deck of random 30 cards. This is so much more appealing. Alright, next up we do have Test of Might, which I think is a fine card. There was a bit of worry when it first came out over a sort of zero-cost strike. I know it's not a strike, but it might as well be, because that's how you're going to finish them off and then they can't strike you back. But I think we've seen now that this is completely okay. Tenebra, no change needed. That's a fine card. Hopefully we'll see a bit more play in Vanescula with the changes I've made, given that it's a vampire. Strength Potion. I've always had a lot of respect for it as kind of like a stronger or a cheaper D-Long. There's not much to be said other than that. It's a good card. Doesn't need changing. Stinkiers. No changes needed. Pretty good in Morvaran. Sticky Sanders. It's a pirate. Maybe it'll go in the pirate deck. Stamina Potion. No changes needed. Stack of Sharks is the same. Though I have flirted with the idea of this, not spending your gold if the effect doesn't go off. So it would say something like, Mortal, double your health and remove 3 gold or something like that, or spend 3 gold. Because then if you're not mortal, the effect doesn't happen, and obviously then you'd make this a zero-cost support. Maybe that would push it over the edge, but I kind of like the idea of, being rewarded when you can predict going down to 15 life, when you know they're going to put you in mortal range, rather than waiting to be in mortal range. I think, cards that reward prediction, like Loot Cache and Heist, could just be, better, and I think going forward, cards that reward prediction and don't have any, cost or drawback, because if you get it wrong, 3 gold is a lot to pay. But Stack of Sharks a fine card. No change to Southsea Pillager or Solomon. Sergeant's, where has he gone? I'm not quite sure. Maybe I have no idea where he's gone. Alright, we found him. I do want to say this now, though. I really like the Jagex change. It's in the game right now. Changed him yesterday to 2 attack, 6 health, which he's always been, but he now gives a 3 armor reward and a 2 to your weapon instead. So the armor has gone up by 1, and the attack of the weapon has gone down by 1, but he is otherwise the same. I prefer that change, the Jagex change, over this change which we have put in. I did not go for something like the Jagex change because I was a bit timid, I think. I didn't think people would like a 2-2 weapon, because it changes the game a lot, right? It changes the game we know and love a tremendous amount, because this card is an absolute staple for reaching into those 10 health creatures like Ogre Warlord, Dagannoth Sentinel, among others that grant base attack. I also thought to an extent that may have been Jagex's vision, because, they haven't changed it ever, and they wanted a card like this. So I was reluctant to change it for those reasons, because, as I mentioned before, who am I to change the vision of the game? My change was just to make it more punishing early on. So instead of it being a net loss of 2 life when you're on 2 base attack, it's now a net loss of 6 life, which I think is a much fairer health investment, and it rewards you more for being on 3 base attack. And it's exactly the same as it always was once you're up to 6 or higher base attack, because now you can just slam this for that 3-2 weapon in the final fight, maybe, or something or maybe you just even want the 2 armor. Maybe that's what you want. Overall, though, I kind of like what Jagex has done. That's the game I want to play And I know it's completely different to the game we were playing, because this was such a big card. But I welcome large changes, I think. And I think nice to see that Jagex is okay with doing that. I want big changes. Next up, we have Skeleton Warrior. So this is interesting because we originally playtested it at 4 gold. I thought that basically all dedicated gold gain creatures could just go up by 1 gold. Except Ali Morrisane, because, you know, he's a no investment, get 3 gold card. But then the more we played, the more we realized that actually no. A lot of the other changes we made, like particularly to Grotworm, and some of the other cards that give gold, like Rock Golem and Obsidian Golem. You know, stuff that you'd never really think about, like those all got improvements and pushed them into the realms of viability. And the cards like this probably shouldn't be pushed, especially since they're, like, basic. Also, I'd like to point out Kalphite Soldier and Goblin Flash Mob we changed completely to be, like, more tribal synergy cards. Because I felt like, you know, Skeleton Warrior's role is just completely nullified by existing Kalphite Soldier. So we made, well, I guess we'll talk about them when we get there. But the point is, originally we had all of the cards that are just dedicated gold gain just be improved a little bit. And then I thought, no. Next up we have Silverlight. The existing one is awful, right? 3 gold, no weapon reward, remove 2 health from all your demons in play. I guess the idea is it helps you kill the demons, but to be honest, you don't really want to be killing the demons until your base attack is high anyway, because you want to deal damage to your opponent. So, like, especially when it's 3 gold, like, you'd rather be spending that on Relisum's Balm off of the exhausts. And if you had spare gold floating around, you'd probably spend it on increasing your base attack to, you know, actually kill the demons with, or even, you know, actual damage cards. All of those would be better than Silverlight. So, to keep the vision of the game intact, this would have to be just much stronger. I guess once you have Silverlight, that's a weapon in RuneScape that's really, really damaging to demons. They don't like that at all. Once you have a Silverlight, then surely every demon you ever encounter should just be a lot worse. So I just wrote, remove 3 health from all demons in your hand and deck. It was also supposed to retain the original effect as well, so that it would remove 2 cards from all of your demons in play. Sorry, 3 health. I wanted to keep it 3 health, but the effect just got lost. I'll have to put that back on there afterwards. And I think this wouldn't even be overpowered, even if the Jagex game engine could actually do a thing like this. I think the most highly optimized demon decks would like not want to include this because it uses up 2 slots which could be used on just something more relevant. The dedicated demon decks, like the really well optimized ones, will want to get their base attack up quickly or use temporary attack to kill the demons with and then strike you because they still have that temporary attack behind the strike. Like this kind of thing I think will be appealing to newer players, but to experienced players that realize I don't need really any help to kill the demons, that'd be fine. So I think it's okay to put a really, really powerful effect on a card that will not be that useful. I didn't want to give Silverlight a weapon or turn it into like a 5/2 weapon or something, or anything like that, because demons, you know, I don't want any more power behind the strikes. This just needs to be like a support/utility card. I want to keep it as similar as possible to the existing card that Mod That Gym and the rest of the designers kind of envisioned. I think it's important to not buff too much, like damage or AP, unless it's gold gain. But it's okay to increase, like, the power of, well, just like Radimus Urkel. Like, that card's fine because it's not, like, a win condition. Yeah, it's really strong, but it's not a win condition. Like, I would not be okay if that, you know, did an enormous number of damage. Like, that kind of thing's not good. Alright, next up we have Shug. No change, perfectly fine card. Pretty good in Dungeoneering and in drafting/seal, whatever you want to call it. Good for new players too. I like that one. Scorpion, no change. Scarface Pete. So, this I've rattled on about for a long time. Card drawing Chronicle and discarding cards is not about resources, right? Like, in a game like Hearthstone or Magic the Gathering, often when your hand size gets to, you know, very small, you just run out of things you can play and you can't utilize your mana. But in Chronicle, you almost always have enough cards to create a 4-card chapter because you do draw 3 at the start of each chapter. So it's very rare where you, like, don't have that final card to put in slot 4. And even if you do, you're only missing 1 slot, I suppose. But, like, card draw and discard more affects your options. Chronicle is a game about building 4-card combos. So cards that affect the number of cards in your hand reduce the options you have. If your Scarface Pete hits their, you know, reach card, like Slime Toes, Toxzil, Count Drain, or something like that, they then might not be able to reach into their Jad, or whatever it is they want to kill. And then suddenly, like, you're just reducing the effectiveness of their turn. Scarface Pete is really strong because it's quite a small creature. The best time to draw cards, we all know, is on Chapter 1, right? And equally, discarding cards is best to do as early on as possible as well, because if you discard 3 random cards at the start of the game, they will then, your opponent, have those cards, they won't have them for the rest of the game. Whereas if you do it on Chapter 3, they'll only have, 3 less card options for the 2 remaining chapters. Obviously, there are some intrinsic things, whereas, you don't want to discard their cards on Chapter 1 because they might not have drawn Virago by then. Obviously, people would mulligan that away in their opening hand, and that's one of the key cards you want to get rid of, or Earth Blast, something like that. People don't often keep that on Chapter 1. So, there's some, intrinsic things that are hard to measure, but, just generally as a rule, drawing and discarding cards is better early on. And Scarface Pete is not very punishing to kill early on. You can just go KGP Agent, or whatever it is you want to do. You're up to 3 base attack, and now you can just 3-hit kill this, and all that is an 8 health investment. That's almost nothing, given the effect that it has. This card definitely could be Rival discards 2 random cards, right? Obviously, if it were that, you wouldn't make it an 8-9, but I do quite like the discard 3 about it. I think that's really interesting. I don't know. If, Virago in its current form and, other cards that are really important to keep are, like that, if they're not as prevalent, then this is certainly, not as good. So that's also just a nerf because of the metagame changing, since Virago isn't as valuable. So Rival discards 3 will probably not be as effective as it is currently. I think a lot of the time this is overvalued because of the metagame, not because the card that it is. The point is, right, if you want to keep it as discard 3 random cards, it needs to be much bigger card in the early game. So you can't just KGP into this. You can, but you'd be taking a lot more damage, right? A much more appropriate amount of damage. But if you wait until you're on 5 base attack, or you have a weapon or whatever it is, you want to 2-hit kill this card, it's only slightly more punishing because you're only taking 1 hit off it. The idea is to make it much more punishing in the early game, but slightly more punishing in the mid game. And given that the effect it has is much stronger in the early game and is a bit less strong in the mid game, that seems fair. So this is what I would do to it, but I would not be surprised and I wouldn't be upset if it was changed to Rival discards 2 random cards. Next up we have Saucy Wench Deckhand. No change there. Fine card. Sir Adam Godsword. I think it's no secret that I just generally don't like weapons, or at least gold-based weapons, very much. This one, fine card, could be a tad underwhelming. I would maybe adjust the health value that it gives you, but it's a fine card. Doesn't really need touching. Sergeant Grimspike is a fine card. Rowdy Cannoneer is a fine card. Romilly Weaklax is a fine card. Rock Golem. Rock Golem's really interesting. Earlier I mentioned on Skeleton Warrior that we basically just buffed all the dedicated gold cards by 1 gold. I was using this during playtesting against a Grieflinzer. I was running a Raptor, a gold gain-based Raptor that bought stats. And it was really interesting. Most of the time it would never hit anything, and that was pretty sad, but sometimes it would, and I didn't ever stop any Dust Devils, and that's, really the only thing you can stop. But, sometimes they take 5 extra damage off of Fremennik Crafter, because they're not on 3 total attack. The weapon still, they still spend the weapon. They still have enough durability to spend. And the same goes for, Repurpose and Karam. You're not going to stop those. But it's really exciting to remove 2 weapon attack. It's not nearly as effective as removing 2 weapon durability, but, that interaction is still exciting, and you still have to think about, where do I place this? So, pushing this card into the realms of playability, due to the gold reward, just improves the fun, I feel. At least that's what I got from this new Rock Golem. And it's also quite an awkward card, because you might want to get that gold early on in the chapter to pay for a support later on in the chapter, but, you don't want to put the Rock Golem in slot 1 because it won't be effective there. You want to move it to slot 2, and it just, you have to think about the whole turn a lot more. I just think this kind of card is good in the Chronicle format. The way Chronicle plays out, I think Rock Golems are quite a nice and exciting card. I guess it does power creep on Skeleton Warrior. Earlier I mentioned we increased, all of the dedicated gold cards by 1 gold, but Skeleton Warrior got reverted back down to 3, but that's fine, right? Skeleton Warrior is a neutral, basic card that you literally get as soon as you create your account. I think it's okay for a Sapphire, which is marginally tiny more expensive, right, to be better. And it's similar to how, Dark Fanatic power creeps on Black Arm Bandit, but that's not a problem. In fact, it's exactly like how Dark Fanatic power creeps on Black Arm Bandit. It doesn't actually matter. No one was running Black Arm Bandit before, and no one was really running Skeleton Warrior before either. So I'm actually a huge advocate for a change like this. Moving on, though. Rock Cake, no change. That's a fine card. Ring of Recoil. Be buffed by 1 damage. I felt like the dedicated Smork You in the Face decks I mentioned earlier when we got to Undead Cow, the self-destructive go, 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 spank, spank, spank decks. I felt like those need a bit of a buff. I think Ring of Recoil is a card that goes in that deck. I was also tempted to buff it since a lot of cards like, you know, Watchtower Guard now give an extra armor. And I mentioned Grotworm as well, and Obsidian Golem, and like a whole bunch of other cards just have a bit more sustain on them. Not that like they're dedicated sustain cards, but they just do reward you more life. And I think as a result of that, like this is the only aggro card outside of Undead Cow that I changed, and I wouldn't be upset if it never saw a change. But I do think like 5 damage is much more exciting. Ring of Karos is unchanged. This, though, was the original card I thought could be that, where is it, Gnomish Ingenuity card that says reduce the cost of all supports in your deck by 1. Like, that's the effect I was, like, thinking Ring of Karos could have, but then I thought, well, actually, maybe this should just be a diamond. Like, I don't think Ring of Karos needs to be changed, but, like, that's originally what gave me the idea. I thought it would be interesting to point that out. But no change, it's a fine card, same for Revenant Demon. Restore Potion, I flirted with making a bit more efficient, but like, given that potions are something you can get at random quite easily now, I think, like, it shouldn't be too good. It's a fine card, though. Red Chimchomper, I felt could do with a bit of a buff. Now, it is only 1 gold, but that's the problem a lot of, like, supports have. The fact that they even cost a gold makes them, like, you can't do this on Chapter 1 Slot 1 anymore, and that, like, makes them a lot worse. Even that just, like, takes them out of a lot of decks. So I think, like, cards that cost any gold, cards that force you to slow down and collect resources to buy them with just, like, need to be improved. And we did this by making a lot of support cards just say draw a card on them, like, just 1 card in addition to their effect, just to kind of incentivize gold gain as an archetype, or just as a stronger way to do things, since, like, a lot of the cards reward you by, like, giving you more options. And I think gold decks need that, right? They just need more options in their hand so they can have more efficient chapters. Creature decks, not so much. But, like, where a card could just have, like, an additional improvement to its effect that was flavorful, I thought that was the better thing to do. So Red Chinchomper deals 2 damage to your next creature as well. And that's what Chinchompers are in RuneScape. They're, like, a wieldable equipment, even though they're kind of like an animal. But you, I suppose you throw them and they kind of explode. And they just do, like, area damage to stuff. So 2 damage to rival and a creature seems quite flavorful. Not much of a change, but I think it helps some of the decks out there. Like, I felt like Red Chinchomper was supposed to go in those 3 attack decks so that you could more easily kill something like a Trollchucker or a Skeleton Warrior, because you get that 1/2 weapon, but it also helps you do a bit of extra damage. I think that 2 damage to your next creature will be valuable for things like Haunted Soul or just other 5 health creatures, because now you're on 2 base attack plus 1 from the weapon, that's 3, and then you deal 2 damage to the next creature, and then you can walk into that 5 health creature and just 1-hit kill it. So I think, like, Red Chinchomper just needed a tiny bit of pushing, as well as a bunch of other 1-cost cards, which you'll see as we move forward. Rance. Again, this comes down to, I want to say cards that cost gold not being good enough, but that's just not true. Like, Rance just wasn't good enough. I mean, it was never bad. It was never a terrible card. It was always pretty good in Dungeoneering, and I imagine it would be very good in Sealed / you get 30 random cards. But, like, from a competitive standpoint, like, a 2 gold, 2/3 weapon is just expensive. Like, yeah, I guess the first charge of the weapon is a 3 attack weapon due to the deal 1 damage to your next creature, but, like, I don't know, I'm just comparing it to old Sergeant Slimetoes and thinking, like, there's no way I'd ever want to put this in any deck, even if I did gain gold. So, let's make it more like Sergeant Slimetoes. And I think now this is quite appealing, right? 3 damage, 3/2 weapon, and, like, deal 1 damage to your next creature, that makes it kind of like 4 damage reach. It's a bit like old Count Draenor / the new Toxic Blowpipe, which is really quite good. So much better than this. I think this just needs a bit more pushing. I'd like to see this have a meaningful place in the game. I mean, like, 3 attack weapons are so premium, and there's not really any cards in the game that give you a 3/2 weapon anymore, so I think that's the role this card should have. It should be the, I'm going to give you a 3/2 weapon card, and that's valuable just because, you know, 3/2 weapons are valuable. I like that. Alright, next up we do have Relison's Balm. No change, that's a fine card. Pirate's Hideout is a fine card. Penguin Sheep is a bit overpowered, but with the nerf to Earth Blast, I think it's not going to be that good. In the context of every other class that isn't Ariam, this is, like, not very good at all. You could even buff this to 6 gold now that Earth Blast has been nerfed in, I guess, in my set. I mean, like, in the actual game, Earth Blast hasn't been nerfed, so maybe you can't do it there. Who's in Calfight? It's a fine card. It's actually, like, not bad. I think this is, like, always been perfectly reasonable and almost playable. Just it's always been, like, slightly outclassed by something else, but it's always nearly been there. Ogre Warlord, I discussed this in a previous video. Just an outrageously good and versatile card. It is both early game AP, right? This isn't particularly hard to kill. It's not that punishing. It's not like it's got 8 attack like Dagannoth Sentinel, and it gives you far more than 2 life. It gives you 5 armor after killing it. So just by comparison, it's just a much stronger card. Yeah, it gives you both armor to your opponent as well, but the decks this goes into half the time just don't care. Or if they do care, well, it turns out you usually have a second Ogre Warlord, and if your opponent stacks up too much armor, including the 5 that you gave them, then you can just drop their armor back down by playing the second one in the late game. That's the other role this card has. Not only is it good, safe, early game AP, it's also late game armor destruction, and it can be really, really powerful. It just, like, I said this before, but like the problem with how hard counters is that they just nullify like a large number of cards in the collection. Like, think back to old Scarface Pete. For those that don't know, Scarface Pete, not Scarface Pete, Redbeard Frank. Old Redbeard Frank used to say both legends set their gold to 0. So the only decks that were competitive were decks that had absolutely no gold in them, because every single deck would run the old Redbeard Frank. The only good deck that had gold in it was like Grief Linzer, which obviously was much better at the time because, well, we won't go into that. But as soon as you saw her stacking any gold, you would just, like, play Redbeard Frank and be, LOL, you have no gold left. So, Linzer would have to be very careful. She'd never stack more than, like, 7 or 8 gold. Like, if you went up into the big numbers, that was dangerous, right? But stacking, like, maybe 6 or 7 was fine because you could kind of bait it out. But it just, like, nullified all of the cards that cost gold, right? Half the collection. Now, Ogre Warlord has a similar effect on just Raptor's armor cards and also a lot of other armor cards and sort of strategies. I think hard counters are just really bad for the metagame. They reduce the options, it makes it less exciting, less variety, just no thank you. I personally don't think any cards in Chronicles should say remove all of your rival's armor, and that is the case in our patch, right? Like, none of the cards in the collection now have an overt destroy all your rival's armor. That's not to say that armor decks will just be completely unchecked, because the cards that used to destroy all armor now have effects that, like don't deter armor, but, like, punish it. Like, they have effects that go against it, and I think those effects will be adequate enough to replace the destroy all armor. In some cases, they might even be better, but it's a case of you can play around them, because you know they can't happen until you have a certain amount of armor, so, like, you know not to stack too much. We'll talk more about that later when we get to it, but Ogre Warlord on the left here, it now increases both Legends armor to 5. This could do with rewording, perhaps. I spent a bit of time trying to think how you might reword that. I couldn't come up with anything, but basically, you know, if you have 1 armor and your opponent has 2 armor, you both go up to 5. If you have 3 armor and they have 4 armor, you both go up to 5. If you have 4 armor and they have 8 armor, you go up to 5, but they stay at 8. That doesn't change, right? What that does, I think, keeps the existing Ogre Warlord the same, like, in terms of early game AP, but, like, removes it as a armor destruction tool later on in the game, because it just shouldn't be both. Alright, next card is Ogre Chieftain, which we've removed the gold of. I think that's a fairly obvious change. This card is very powerful. I said in a previous video that you can compare this to Black Demon, right? Black Demon is strike rival and deal 4 damage. So this says deal damage to rival equal to their total attack, which is a bit like them striking themselves, which is still kind of a strike in and of itself, right? And then it does plus 4 damage to them, but Black Demon does 4 damage to you as well. And then Black Demon doesn't come with a gold reward, this does. And Black Demon exhausts you, this doesn't, right? Like, it just has too many things going on for it, it's really obvious. So we took off the gold, and it might still be better than Black Demon. Alright, next up we have more Ogres, Ogre Brute. So I think there's 2 ways to go about changing this. And the first is making the condition easier to meet, like having your rival having 5 base attack. I think it's just a bit too much. So that's what we went with, reducing that down to 4, and I think this is now definitely, like, a fairly reasonable card. It's actually not bad at all. But the other way, I think people have been suggesting, well, it should remove 2 base attack, make it like it's a, you know, it's a counter card, the tech card, it should be effective. But I think the problem with remove 2 base attack is that no matter how hard that condition is for them to meet, like, removing 2 base attack is really strong. I think it would be very hard to make a balanced Ogre Brute if it removed 2 base attack, because it's quite a lot. Like, just think how good Karam is. Do we really need multiple effects? Like, if you start putting that into the neutral pool, I don't know. I don't like that very much. So this is less of a tech card and more of just like a grief card, like the old Ogre Brute, the original Ogre Brute. But it's like a balanced version, I guess. Because you kind of have to wait until they've already gotten off their feet before you can start reducing their base attack. Partly, like, the problem with the original Ogre Brute. For those that don't know, original Ogre Brute was a 2/5 creature that said rival loses 1 base attack. So you could just play that chapter 1, slot 1, and if you were going first, your opponent, like, then their very first card slot would be they're on 1 base attack. removing that starting base attack just makes it so hard to get off your feet. But once you've gotten off your feet, like, instead of reducing them from 2 to 1, that's like a 100% reduction in their base attack. This is like you reduce them from 4 to 3, which is like a 25% reduction. So this is like not nearly as bad, or sorry, it's not nearly as... The funny thing is I've never actually thought this Ogre Brute was like that far away from being playable. For a period of time I was running it in Grieve Linza, and it was doing like reasonably well against those decks that stacked lots of base attack, like, you know, Venescula. In the end though, aggro decks became a lot more popular and this just wasn't as good. So like I was using it as a tech card, but I just don't think it was like good enough. Alright, next up, Melza the Mad, which we just gave an extra 1 gold to. Like, the effect's not bad. I think, you know, given the 30 card deck size in Chronicle and how many you start with, and you draw 3 cards per chapter, and everyone likes to draw on those chapters too, like, you do get to those Tainted Cabbages quite quickly. Like, that effect isn't bad, but I think it just needed a bit more oomph in the moment you played it, because you don't see any benefit on this effect until later on in the game, and you kind of need something like the moment you play it for it to feel like it's worth doing. Like, the return is too long. I think 2 gold's pretty appealing. I think some decks will want to run that. Maybe like Honest Raptor, since he's all about like his own agenda, and this just disrupts his opponent and he can do his own thing a bit better. Like, it's just... I think that would be where it goes. But also it'll just be more appealing in Dungeoneering and drafting and that kind of thing. Just a tiny little bit of a push, I think. But also Mimic, not a bad card. Mischievous Imp is left unchanged. Mithril Dragon is unchanged. Mutineer is unchanged. Nastroth costs 1 less. We'll talk about that next time. Leave a like if you thought this was interesting. Really looking forward to the comments. I do check the Reddit. I've been really enjoying that recently.